everybody. I'm Sean Reynolds from Sportsnet, about to be joined by Ken Weep from the Winnipeg Free Press. Together we are Kenny and Renny. This is the Kenny and Renny post-career of Rick Bowness show. What a phenomenal career he's had. And it was interesting to be there for the end of it. We're going to break down all the stuff that was said, kind of the reasons we think why things went the way they did. I think both of us said at the end of the year that, we had expected heading into the offseason, Rick Bowness would be moving on from the Winnipeg Jets, moving on from his career. That said, his comments right at the end after they were eliminated seemed to kind of throw us off the trail there a little bit. Interesting, because at the time he'd already talked to his, or I think his, we'll go through the timeline. We'll get Ken on. We'll go through the timeline after that. But we're going to get into all that kind of stuff, where the Jets go from here. Lots to talk about in this. Before I do that, Rennie's been hard at work for you folks out there, sending out tickets today. Over half the tickets for the Kenny and Renny year ender have been sent out. More than half have been spoken for. In fact, a lot more than half. In fact, as of right now, 250 spots to get into the KNR year ender at TCB on Monday, May 13th, which is going to be an absolute blast. Just 34 spots are unspoken for. So in less than a week, that room has been gobbled up and gobbled up and gobbled up. There's, I don't know what's the math on that. Like 85% of the tickets are sold. So if you are sitting on your hands, sitting on the fence, it's time to get off either of those. Get a hold of me at SN Sean Reynolds. Direct message me and set aside your tickets, and we'll take care of that, because they are running out. They are running out fast. Not a lot of room left if you weren't feeling a sense of urgency, and if you were thinking, you know what, maybe I'll pick up some tickets last minute. I'm telling you right now, there will not be any last minute tickets kicking around. So make sure you get a hold of me, and we'll go from there. And I'm not going to waste any more of your time. Let's get right into it. Time to bring the man with the best music in the business. Here comes Kenny, everybody. Ken, neither of us looking like Vittorio Rossi, man. I won't look like a Vittorio Rossi man for a while. I've got all the suits basically tucked away for round 3 and round 4, which I will be going to do, and the draft as well. So I get a little bit of a break here in round 2 before things get crazy. Again, I will be covering the Western Conference Final and the third round Stanley Cup Final, and the draft down in Vegas, the last live draft, where everyone's going to be going down there. So get your kicks in while they still while they're still going. But Ken, just to say, we're not really selling it very well right now, but I promise you, I've got like 4 really great suits from Vittorio Rossi, all tucked away, ready to go for round 3 in my suitcase. You want to have that kind of weight, that kind of ability to have those kind of suits just sitting around. You know what to do. Head on down to Vittorio Rossi. Loudly proclaim Kenny and Renny sent you. Ask for Frankie and the boys. They'll take care of you and do you up right. Ken, just anything to say before we get going? Why don't you give Sweet Lou a shout out as we start out here?
Sure. For folks who have realty needs you'd like to have met, you can contact our main man, Lou Ferlin, at Royal LePage Dynamic Realty, 204-791-9971, or at the office, 204-989-5000. His email is lou@louferlin.ca. That's LOU@LOUFURLAN.ca. Lou Ferlin, excellent realtor, excellent human being, and excellent supporter of the community, including our podcast.
And I'm going to talk about, hey, Kenny and Renny, listening to Kenny and Renny, watching Kenny and Renny. That's really paying off for all you folks out there, because we're just going to keep going. Every time something interesting happens, we'll do pop-ups just like we're doing right now. So yes, it pays. It pays off to listen to Kenny and Renny. And if you're looking to pay off high interest credit cards or debt, we suggest you go talk to our friends at Cambrian Credit Union about their payoff loan. They can show you how taking out a loan to pay off your debt actually gets you debt-free faster, and you can save thousands of dollars. Go to cambrian.nb.ca to book an appointment online. Ken, let's get into it. What'd you make of the presser yesterday?
Yeah, I mean, emotion level was high for Rick. We know this is something that is very important to his soul, and and very important to him. I mean, I loved his openness. I love the fact that he was there to share that with Judy. And at one point, I'm pretty sure he was pointing at her, and when he started tearing up again. And I love Rick sharing the honesty about how they've been together since they were 16 years old, and she followed him around the world, and even kind of couldn't help but chuckle when he said that Judy might miss it more than he does. I mean, that's possible. I don't know Judy enough to make that assessment, but I know that Rick is going to miss a lot of things about being around the rink. And I love the fact that he basically made it clear this was not a funeral or a memorial for him. He would still be around. He would still have his phone close by, and he would still have the game on television, and he would be sharing his thoughts and opinions, whether that's with players or coaches or management and things like that. So, want to join the long chorus of people sending Rick all the best in retirement. He's a great human being, and when you hear the way that people talk about him, Sean, around the league, I mean, our friend and colleague Kevin BX, I thought, had some great words to share, both on Hockey Night and later on Connected, just about the kind of sort of echoing what Adam Lowry told us in that scrum yesterday afternoon about how much he cares about the people. And in a sport that occasionally has large egos, Rick was someone who carried with himself with confidence, but he cared a lot about the people that were around him. I had a great conversation with Stars general manager Jim Nill, who has known Rick for a lot of years and been around him in a number of different capacities, including general manager of the Stars when Rick took over as head coach. And he shared a story that we hear often and have seen with our own eyes. He said the thing that was the biggest compliment to Rick is that, when you're traveling around North America, you go into the bowels of the arena and you can't go more than 10 steps without Rick having to stop and talk to somebody, whether it's an usher or a doorman or a popcorn vendor. He knows them by name, and he always takes the time to treat them with the same level of respect he would to his own players or anybody else that he dealt with in the game. And to me, that's Rick's lasting legacy as an outstanding human being. And this is also a guy that was a great hockey coach, had to adapt over the years. And the fact that his first NHL head coaching job, Sean, was in 1989, and he was still doing it at a very high level, and such a high level that he's one of the 3 nominees for the Jack Adams Award, tells you all you need to know about both the person and the ability to communicate and the hockey smarts that he also brings to the table.
I told Judy Bowness my story yesterday. First off, when he finished, when Rick Bowness finished up, I walked over and said hi to Judy, and said to her, first and foremost, because think about this. Think about 50 years. Hockey has been the primary focus of her life, his life, their kids' life. It shows in that his kids got involved in hockey. But I said, just first and foremost, thank you for, for sharing him with the hockey world. You know what I mean? Because I know that there was a lot of sacrifices that went into her going, her life is basically revolved around what's happened, which means it revolves around the Winnipeg Jets for the last couple of years. And then I said to her, told her my story where I said I was at 9 or 10 years old when Rick Bowness was hired as the head coach of the Winnipeg Jets. I remember in Pinawa, Manitoba, my dad reading the paper in the kitchen, our old round cruddy table, kitchen table, reading the paper and seeing Rick Bowness. And I was like, Rick Bowness? Who's this guy? And I said, this guy's never going to last, I said to my dad. So I told Judy that at the age of 10, that was my analysis on Rick Bowness. And I'm not sure my analysis has gotten any better.
Still the same.
To be honest with you, Ken.
Step right into that one. Step right into that one. Don't lead with your chin.
Well, it's a self-own. It's a self-own, but interesting talking with her. I think the lasting legacy of Rick Bowness in an era where I think Rick Bowness was on the cusp, or sorry, not on the cusp. He was on the leading edge of coaching in a way where it wasn't like he didn't strike you as a coach who was going to try and browbeat you or bully you into doing something, which really was a hallmark of coaches in the 80s and the 90s, right? The time that he came in, that's what coaches were doing to try to get what they got out of their players. That was never Rick Bowness. But at the same time, as new age coaching has come in, and there's coaches that try to reach players in different ways, and he remained an old school coach in the way that I don't think whatever changed about Rick Bowness. Now, I think he talked about it. He was a lot more excitable when he was a younger coach. That said, he remained excitable. He remained, held his players to account, held officials to account everywhere he went. The one thing that I think is the legacy of Rick Bowness that I think every single coach in the NHL, outside the NHL, in any sport, should really be taking a look at was he just always found a way to be honest. Like, you never felt like Rick Bowness was putting something over on you. And it was blunt honesty often. You could tell that when he first came in that there were a lot of times that the Winnipeg Jets bristled at that blunt honesty, because I think that they came from a very different style of coaching, where they were, a lot more managed under Paul Maurice's regime. Rick Bowness didn't manage you. He told you the truth. If you had a bad game, he'd tell you had a bad game. This was why, and this is how you can fix it and make it better. I see a guy like Jared Bednar is exactly like that now. I see those signs in a lot of coaches. You used to have coaches that would try to pull strings and do all those different kind of things and try and torque players and get them up. I'm not saying that Rick Bowness didn't leverage things, but I think the greatest piece of leverage that Rick Bowness ever had was the truth. He was never afraid to bring it out. He was never afraid to put it in front of people. And I think he made every single coaching staff that he was on as an assistant stronger because of it, as a head coach stronger because of it. And then finally, you could truly tell, and all the players said this, and this is why Ken, I remember going and covering the Cup final in 2015, and Rick Bowness was a star down there. The media was wanting to talk with him. He was the assistant coach. How often does that happen? And every player that was ever coached by him, like Kevin Bieksa talked about, they wanted to talk with him. They wanted to see him. They wanted to visit with him. He treated the media with respect. When you talk to guys like Ian McIntyre or Murph out of Vancouver about their time with him there, just so much respect to everybody. He found a way to get through it and get through media members saying that he had, he wasn't doing this right. Fans calling for his job, like was happening here in Winnipeg in a year where he was a Jack Adams nominee. He sailed through all those things. He never took himself too seriously. He always treated people with kindness. He took his job extremely seriously. He took the way he treated people extremely seriously. I see signs of Rick Bowness in so many of the extremely successful next generation of coaches. And just because he's top of mind, because I went through those series, like Jared Bednar is a guy that I think, I asked him about Rick Bowness. The truth shall set you free. I'm a big believer in that. And I don't think anyone held up the truth as highly as Rick Bowness. And it made for one heck of a career for him.
Yep, right on. Let's
okay. We got a treat for everybody here.
Yeah, we do.
We're gonna bring in Jason Bakula, because he has great analysis, but B, man, every time he comes on the show sings, and I'm honestly giving him a tryout here because maybe I'm gonna push this guy out of the way and go on to the Jay and Renny show here. But bring it in, Bax. Good to see you, Bakula. What were your thoughts? Or let's maybe start out. I'll give you the open canvas. You can talk about your thoughts about Rick Bowness moving on, or I'm sure you've probably got a Rick Bowness story in there somewhere. Just take the mic and let us know what you've seen behind the scenes.
So I remember in the draft, I
Oh,
believe it was the LA draft. Can you guys hear me all right? You got
you
me?
got to turn it up a little bit.
I'll do it again.
There you go. You got to just talk closer into the mic like that.
We good now, boys? Are we good now?
No, I don't know. It's getting worse. Can you crank it up a little bit?
Yeah. How's that?
There. That's good. That's good.
Okay, we're back. I've never been told that I was too quiet. I'll tell you that. So I'll take that as a compliment, actually. Anyways, I want to say it was the LA draft, so I'm dating myself a little bit here. But so coaches are, they're hired to be fired, right? In general, like that's the unfortunate rule of thumb. And there's a saying in the National Hockey League as well, even on the scouting side of things, that the further out the ladder you get, the closer to the door you get. It's just the way that it kind of rolls out. And some guys aren't. They take it so personally that they want to be out of sight, out of mind a little bit. You know what I mean? They don't want to be around everybody. They don't want to be there feeling like they're in search of their next opportunity. They don't want to get in the way. And Rick Bowness was exactly the opposite. I can recall a couple of times when he was out of a job or looking to, extend his assistant coaching, or, I'm not even so sure that he wanted to be a head coach again. I think it was just like, it happened and it was a great fit in Dallas and then for you guys in Winnipeg. But I remember him in the lobby of the hotel, just kind of, shaking hands, kissing babies, carrying on, being himself, and basically making sure that everybody knew that, I'm still, I want a job. Like, I want to be in it. I love this. I want to be around you people. I'm not too shy to talk about the fact that, wherever he was let go from at that point or whatever he was doing, it didn't matter. Like, he's humble, right? You know what I mean? He didn't take anything personally to the point where he held it against people, I guess is the best way I can put it. He's a man of the people. The guy could run for prime minister probably in the next election here and get a heck of a lot of votes. I'll put it to you that way.
Yeah, you'd have the maritime votes for sure locked up there, but it touched a lot of lives across this great country and all across North America. What was your reaction to? I mean, again, we know that yesterday was all about honoring the legacy of Rick Bowness, Books, but I mean, the facts are there's another job available around the NHL, and obviously you've worked in management. I mean, what would the next steps of the process look like for Kevin Cheveldayoff and his staff? We know they had a search 2 years ago. We know they have a coach in waiting on staff. Curious what the next steps would be, and does Scott Arniel interview first, or does he have to wait because he's more of a known quality and commodity?
That's a good one there. I mean, that's delicate because I believe Scott Arniel fits the mold of what the Winnipeg Jets are looking for in their next head coach. Like, the first thing that I always think about when I think about the Winnipeg Jets is a sense of community around the team. Like it's like we all pull the rope in the same direction. There's a sense, it's different in Winnipeg. There's, I heard you talking about Jared Bednar. I would argue that in Colorado, they've got that going on as well. That he's been there so long now. John Cooper, like, there's a certain way that certain franchises conduct their business. And there's an expectation amongst the group, that familiarity, the culture, to continue on with the culture that's already in place. So I think that Scott Arniel deserves not only the first interview, but the most consideration out of any candidate, because he's part of this culture, of this community and this franchise for a long time, isn't he? I mean, this isn't just a now thing. This is a long time thing. So if you look at what St. Louis did, guys, with hiring Drew Bannister for 2 years, extending him, I mean, it was kind of in the, it's different, but sort of the same, right? Like Bones missed a little bit of time there with different things this year. And so Scotty's got his finger on the pulse there. If you do go through the process, though, of hiring, here's how it works behind the scenes. The first thing is you got to take a look at the lay of the land with the franchise and where we are, with pending UFAs, pending RFAs, how we want to play moving forward. What's going to be the MO of our team? How are we going to identify as a group? And so if you go down the list, the Dillon, DeMello, Miller, Brossoit, Monahan, Toffoli. Correct me if I'm missing anybody else here. Perfetti's a RFA, right? So we didn't get a full season out of Velarde. We hope that he's going to be more healthy. How do we want to play as a group, and what kind of coach is going to be able to nurture that? What's the best fit for us moving forward? So first thing you do is you go to Scott Arniel and you take a look at that. He's most familiar. Do we want to run it back with some of these guys or not? Decisions to be made. But the fit has to be there. One of the things that Chevy does really well, and it trickles down throughout the entire organization, and I don't say this lightly because I've been around the block a few times. Like the group in Winnipeg communicate very well. They stay in their lane. Okay. They stay in their lane. Like, Mark Hillier's not going to call up Chevy tomorrow and say, as the director of scouting, here's my thought on that next head coach. But if Chevy gives him a call and he wants to, do some investigating behind the scenes on the character of somebody outside the organization, all these guys are intertwined, if you get my drift. So it's going to be an interesting process, but it's delicate. It's delicate because this franchise in Winnipeg needs the right type of leader that's going to be intertwined in everything that it means to be a Winnipeg Jet.
I get that. I get that 100%. I also think if you're kind of looking at a global view here of the Winnipeg Jets, you could almost look at them the way you similarly do to a team like the Toronto Maple Leafs that can't get past the first round and then couldn't get past the second round. And, I think of a team like the San Jose Sharks for years that always had great success in the regular season, couldn't get over the hump in the playoffs. When there's a very specific problem to be solved, I wonder how that changes things, because Rick Bowness was brought in specifically to fix two things, the Winnipeg Jets culture, and then kind of get this team to a place where it would get to the postseason and be able to show its best rather than seem to kind of get punched in the stomach and limp out of the playoffs. He fixed one of those things. It's acknowledged that he fixed the culture, but he couldn't fix that problem that we've seen of this Jets team that in 2019 flagged in the playoffs. In 2018 was maybe the best team in the league, lost a game, lost their momentum, and then went out 4 straight. This is an organization, going back to Atlanta, that has lost 4 straight games in the playoffs 6 times. And it's almost like a zombie bite virus that seems to be in this locker room. And it happened all over again this year. So when there's kind of like a very specific problem that an organization seems to have so much figured out, but can't figure out that one thing, how does that change things, Jay, in the way organizations may go out pursuing someone to fix that problem?
So that's all part of the process that I was trying to discuss or trying to point out at the beginning. So you got to start to look at your personnel in that discussion, right? So it's a discussion outside of obviously the coach, because first and foremost, the general manager and the organization are going to put in place, a strategy or present a strategy to ownership here in their exit meetings, for example, of what they see that they need to fill going forward. Now, if I'm the ownership group, I'm also putting it back on Chevy's desk and saying, well, who is the coach that can get more out of this group than the way you're describing it? So I have to be honest with you guys. I don't know that the Winnipeg Jets could have had any worse luck coming off a decent season than facing the juggernaut that is the Colorado Avalanche. So let's just throw that out there first of all. Now, if you want to win championships, everybody's a juggernaut come, this time of year anyways. Like really, everybody has a different version of themselves, but it's just something you have to deal with. I was alarmed at how fast, I wasn't alarmed how fast Colorado played. I was alarmed how the Jets were exposed with the relentless skill, speed, and tenacity of the Colorado Avalanche. So what have we identified as a team in the past? For me personally, a Winnipeg Jet, especially in the back end, is kind of, I don't want to just say big and burly, but certainly leaning more physical, more grit, more determination. Pionk can race up and down the ice. Morrissey obviously is Morrissey, but some of these other guys, I would have thought they would have been harder to play against. I guess is my short take on it, without throwing anybody under the bus. It's just an observation. So you have to be held accountable, and that's where where do we do with these UFAs, RFAs? Where are we going to spend our dough? What do we need to do better? I think that they need to be. I think they need at least another guy on the back end that can play quicker, move pucks, transport pucks, shelter. The responsibilities of a Morrissey, for example. Pionk can be a whirling dervish, I actually thought Pionk had a good year compared to the previous season. I thought he was better this year on balance. But again, DeMello's a warrior. Where do you want to go with it? It's the makeup of the group, and that's going to fall on Chevy's desk. Tough one to answer, Sean, because there's a lot of moving parts. That's a lot of bodies, right? That we have to
Yeah.
make decisions on. A lot. But let's also address the elephant in the room here. Hellebuck needs to be better. He's our best player. Okay, he is our best player. We've got great players, but Connor Hellebuck for me is our best player, and I think Connor Hellebuck would admit that he wasn't at his best in playoffs. Couldn't come up with that extra timely save. And when you're Vezina Trophy candidate like he is, the expectation is that you can get the job done.
Right on. I just want to go back to the coach search one more time here, Jay. Last time we know, I mean, they had such a broad view, you know, whether it was John Tortorella, who wasn't really on anyone's bingo card as someone they would be in consideration with, but we heard there were some hard truths kind of delivered in that meeting with Kevin Cheveldayoff. Both Sean and I spoke with Torts about it, you know, after when they rolled through town. I mean, how important is that maybe just the institutional knowledge of the outside view when you talk to other candidates? I mean, obviously you're not just bringing in someone to try to, you know, sap their, you know, thought process and not be a real candidate, but what would the value be of, you know, of having a guy like a Todd McClellan or, you know, Jay Woodcroft or, you know, some of the other guys who are available, even a Dean Evison who was in the division for the interview process to see, and then maybe someone blows you away. And then I was also curious about when it comes to either AHL candidates or a junior league candidate, how do you handle that? Does someone call the team or do you reach out to them, or what is that part of the process like?
So I'll start with the junior coaches. A lot of these coaches nowadays have representation. You know, it's not the way it used to be where you just represented yourself. So especially, I mean, let's be honest, usually the coaches who are still coaching are getting the most amount of attention, right? Like, you know, obviously Dale Hunter's not going anywhere, I don't think, in London. You never know, but they usually have representation and they'll reach out to them, and then it'll just, you know, it'll simmer. We'll just see how you know, what the timeline looks like, I guess is the best way for me to put it. Here's the thing, guys. I agree with how you just positioned that, Kenny. Like, it's always beneficial to get an outside perspective on what other people perceive to be the weaknesses of our group if we're going to hire you as a coach. Like, you've already strategized against us. You've already you know, whether it was in playoffs or not, you've already strategized against us, so you know, or you've tried to pick apart some of our weaknesses and also identified our strengths that you know we do very well, which puts you on your toes as an opponent. So that process, I think, is really beneficial, and that's where you have to escape the Scott Arniel comfort zone, if you will, and you have to branch out. Like Dean Evison, to me, would be an excellent candidate as well for the Winnipeg Jets. Why do I say that? He coached in the division. Dean Evison is one of the most intense competitors in the National Hockey League. Like, if you watch him on the bench, and you guys probably seen him more than me, but he's got some of the best scowls that are in the industry. I mean, he looks like his cranium's going to explode sometimes. You know what I mean? It's great. I love it. I love the passion. And I think that the Winnipeg Jets and the fans would appreciate something like that as well. Like, you know, a Gerard Gallant, for example. I had the pleasure of working with Gerard. I worked with a wide range of coaches in Florida, you know, from the Kevin Deneen's, who came up, you know, obviously a great career, but came up through the American League, Kenny, to address your point. You know, Gerard, and then obviously Joel Quenneville at the end. Everybody was a little bit different. Gerard would be a fascinating candidate. You know, I don't know if he's a candidate or not, but he would be a fascinating candidate because he's a mix of hard ass / pat you on the back as well. He's right in between.
I think you nailed it there. Gallant is fascinating to me because the one thing I think that we saw from the Winnipeg Jets is the blunt directness of Rick Bowness. At times clashed with a group that definitely had a coach in Paul Maurice that managed them a little bit more. And I think that Gallant seems to really strike that line of being like the nice guy coach that everybody loves, but also really holding people to account. I know Rick Bowness, like you said, shaking hands and kissing babies, everyone loved him, but he was definitely brought that fire, whereas Gallant is I don't know necessarily behind the scenes or on the bench if he would be exactly like that, but talking to him, he's a pretty quiet guy. So I think that's fascinating. Just a last one for me, because I know you've got things to do, Jay. that outside perspective that you're talking about, the Jets going out and looking for. And you've kind of talked a little bit about this, but I'm wondering, for someone who's been within management and organizations, when you've got a guy like Arneal who's right here, he's come out in the media, he said, I want to be the guy. He's made this place his home. He's been with the organization forever. I think everyone is operating under the assumption that there's, kind of an unspoken succession plan that's been in place this whole time. How do you go about using the opportunity of going out and getting the outside perspective, having all the smartest coaching minds in the world tell you what's wrong with your team and how it could be fixed? How do you walk that line as management without upsetting a guy like Arneal if you end up going in that direction?
Well, it's delicate, but this is the part where we have to take stock of the league. This is the top hockey league in the entire universe. So there's only 32 of these jobs, and I'll put it to you this way: at the beginning of the year, there's some noise in Winnipeg that the building wasn't full every night, right? For a while there, there's some noise about that. There's a business to be run in Winnipeg. We need to be the best version of ourselves from the top down. So if I'm fully invested as an ownership group and a management team, et cetera, you have to go through the process. Scott Arneal's been around the National Hockey League for a lifetime. He's going to understand and respect that process. Of course, he wants the job, and he should come out and say that. But he's also going to respect the fact that there's a process that we have to go through here, because this is big business. This isn't just, your buddy next door that you had you got the same foursome every week, and the one guy drops out and you're going to go knock on your buddy's next door because he's the man in waiting. It's not that simple. Like, this is the National Hockey League. So I guess I would double down on that and just say to this, that if it ruffled too much of Scott's feathers, that process, then unfortunately you might have to eliminate him in the process, because, you have to be respectful of the upper echelon process that is the Winnipeg Jets doing what's best for the franchise.
Yeah, and I would say too, I'm kind of fortunate. When my first job in 2000, Scott Arneal was the assistant coach with the Moose. I've known him for a long time. We know that his stint in 2010 to 2012 with Columbus didn't go well, Jay, but he's also has a reputation. This isn't just a guy who's a token person on the staff. This is a guy who's had a ton of impact on staffs with Alain Vigneault and Peter Laviolette, and now with Rick Bowness. What do you think that Scott is presenting in terms of, what he brings to the table, and maybe and how important is it that he shares what he learned from that process in 2010 to 12 when he's getting ready for this job that he's much more ready for, maybe than he was at the time?
Well, scar tissue, anybody who coaches in Columbus seems to have to build up a lot of scar tissue after they're done there. That's one thing I would say. Listen, how about the commitment? How about the commitment sticking with the process here for Scott Arneal? Let's not discount that. He had that opportunity and he stuck with it, and now he's on the cusp of potentially another opportunity. I have a ton of respect for that. In terms of the group itself, the belief would have to be there again that he can bring out the best version of everybody at the hardest time of the year. I don't discount that he can do that. I think that he can do that, but I would counter it in my conversation if I was in the war room with this: like, how uncomfortable is our group with the result at the end of the year? And if we respect this guy as the potential next head coach, but is our group going to be comfortable all over again at the outset, or are we all going to be in it a different way? Sometimes an outside voice, a bulldog coming in, isn't a bad thing, even if it's for a short period of time. And it's delicate. He's a top candidate for me. He brings structure, continuity. He's engulfed in the community there, which I think is really important in Winnipeg. So he ticks off a lot of boxes. But we got to win in playoffs, fellas. We got to win in playoffs. So who's going to get that? Who's going to get us over the hump?
No doubt. Jay, it's good for me, Ken. If there's anything else you need to squeeze out before we let him go.
Oh, just because we have you, what second round series intrigues you the most, Jay? And why?
Ooh, well, all of a sudden, Boston and Florida took on a little bit of a shine. I thought that was going to be a different result last night. Edmonton, Vancouver is fascinating to me. I feel like Vancouver stuck with their process all year. It's going to be interesting to see if they can be resilient enough against the the track meet that is the Edmonton Oilers and that juggernaut power play.
I got to say, after Murph missed a couple of games and I went in to cover them, boy, oh boy, talking with Talkit, like that's a guy who was just constantly, I thought, doing a really good job of giving his group a little bit of leash, but then slowly bringing them back when they got out of it, right? Like there's a system they need to play to be successful, but he also knows where they're coming from, a bunch of guys who like to have fun and get out and score goals. And so he's trying to allow that, but he's trying to build in a little bit of structure. I thought he managed that balance really well. Like it wasn't iron fisted. This is what we do every night. It was like, okay, do you do a little bit of the stuff that you like to do, and then slowly trying to bump them towards it. But accountability was always kind of the overall theme, and kind of lasting and bouncing back. And there were a lot of points this season with that team that it looked like they were going to crumble, and then they found their way back. So I think that this is an Edmonton Oilers series. I think they win it in 5 or 6. That said, I wouldn't be surprised if I was proven wrong, because he as a coach has done a good job with that group, and I think proven me wrong a number of times already this year.
Accountability and process, guys. There's no when you're held accountable and you stick to a straight line process for the most part. At the hardest time of year, you don't stray, right? You've already done this for a long period of time, and that's what's fun to watch about them. And their best player hasn't even been close to their best player yet, right?
Yes.
So we'll see what happens there.
No doubt. Jay, really appreciate you coming on.
Right
as
on.
always. You make the show pop, and it means the world to us that you carve out time for us. Thank you so much.
Amazing. It's great to see you guys. Thanks for having me on. Let's talk draft as we get closer.
Yes.
Yeah, we'll see you in Vegas for sure.
You bet.
All right. I'm looking forward to that. Bring your golf clubs, Kenny, because, you never know. You never know.
Sounds like a
See you
good
guys.
plan. Have a great day. Thank you.
Yeah. Let's get into some potential coaching candidates. It's going to spring a little surprise on everyone and Kenny here, but when I was down at the GM's meetings, okay, yeah, that works. We're gonna get you just heard Jay talk about how coaches have representation now.
Yep.
Coach agents. They're not allowed to be player agents. I met one when I was down at the GM meetings this year out of Chicago, a former black ace with those cup winning teams, goaltender who came within that close of winning the national championship when he was younger, was on a team with Keith Tkachuk, I believe. Anyways, Ian Greengrass is going to join us here shortly, just to kind of give us a little bit of his take of the coaching market going into this here. I'm not sure how much he'll share because he's got certain clients, but he's going to give us a look that I don't think anyone else out there could possibly give us. So he's going to pop in a little bit here. Regardless, Ken, Jay got into some of the intriguing candidates. Give me like 3 to 5 that intrigue you.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, and then obviously we mentioned Scott O'Neill is one, but I think that of the other people that I mentioned in my article in the Free Press today, I think Todd Nelson is an interesting study. He's a guy who has won at every level. He has some ties to Rick Bowness. He was on a staff in Dallas with Rick. He has some ties to Kevin Cheveldayoff as an assistant coach with the Chicago Wolves. Right now, he's coaching the Hershey Bears. They won the Calder Cup last year. He also won the Calder Cup with the Grand Rapids Griffins. That's a team that was, in the division with the Manitoba Moose for a long time. This is a guy who has, some NHL head coaching experience as well. He took over for Dallas Eakins in Edmonton and as on an interim basis, and it didn't go as well necessarily as it did for Chris Knobloch taking over for Jay Woodcroft this year, but. He's a guy that has a lot of he's known as a player's coach, but he's also known for his ability to bring younger players along, and he is a guy who cares a lot. He's a guy like a lot of similar qualities to Andrew Brunette, who did just a fabulous job with the Nashville Predators this year. So I think that he would be someone that would be of interest from the American Hockey League level, but also has a lot of NHL experience. I think I mentioned Todd McClellan. I think he's a guy who would be on the list as well. I didn't have him in my 6 today, but he's definitely someone that is of interest to me. I mentioned David Carl as sort of there's always kind of one of these long shot candidates. Sean, I mean, like it would be kind of he's 34 years old, so obviously very young. He took over from Jim Montgomery at the University of Denver. The Pioneers won the NCAA Frozen Four this year. Obviously, he is very secure where he is right now. But with a young guy like that, I wonder if the lure of the NHL would be something that would have some appeal. Obviously, there's no connection, I don't think, to Kevin Cheveldayoff, other than the Jets have a prospect in Garrett Brown who hurt his knee early in the year that plays at the University of Denver. But those are some of the names that are on there. Jay Woodcroft is someone that we're interested in. Sean, what happens with him? I mentioned Craig Berube on my list. Berube is a guy who, a lot of people are speculating could be at the top of the Toronto Maple Leafs list. Obviously, Travis Green getting the job in Ottawa today. That's another person off the board, I guess, if you will. Dave Haxtell was the head coach at the University of North Dakota for a long time, Sean. So, and I remember the days when Dave would used to come out when the Fighting Sioux weren't playing. He spent a lot of time in press boxes at Moose games. So he's another guy who is out there. So how about you? I mean, I think there's a ton of candidates, and I think the beauty of this, Sean, I mean, with guys like Spencer Carberry having great success this year, and again, I understand that they were the first team out and everything else, but Washington was not a playoff team necessarily, but they made the playoffs. I thought Carberry did a really good job there, so I can see other people like a Mitch Love, who is, was a guy who was, in Stockton with the Flames farm team for a long time. He was an AHL Coach of the Year, who I believe is on Carberry's staff in Washington. And then too, there's a guy that has been getting a lot of publicity in the American Hockey League level. Carl Taylor with the Milwaukee Admirals is a guy who was a finalist before they hired Andrew Brunette. So those would be some of the names that kind of stand out as possibilities. But again, I think that Scott is the front runner, but I think the Jets are going to do their due diligence, and there will be a wide search. But Todd Nelson is another guy that would be fairly high up on that list.
That's a good list. I don't know that I need to add to anyone to that list. I will say this. When you talked about Andrew Brunette, he really reminds me of what they've got going on in Colorado with Jared Bednar. Like, there's two guys who just have this insane calm to them. And what I mean by that is that you see a lot of coaches, they're kind of living and dying by the play. And if their team isn't playing well, you can see they're wearing it and they're upset a little bit. I mean, definitely Rick Bowness was one of those guys. The Jets weren't playing how they were supposed to be playing, and you could see he would wear it. And there's just not a lot of moments on the benches that you see from Bednar or Brunette where the players are seemingly affecting their coach. And what I heard from Brunette was a lot of the same that I heard from Bednar, in that it's just like, well, guys, this is what you need to do. If you do that, we're going to succeed. If you don't do it, we're not going to succeed. And I can't do it. So I can put this out on the board, but if you're not going to do it, I mean, we're all men around here. We all have jobs to do. Let's figure it out. Right. And I thought Brunette really got a lot out of his group by doing that. Now it's a little bit of a younger group, and there's some good character in that room, right? There's good character on defense.
Great leadership.
There's great leadership. Ryan O'Reilly there. But I feel like the Jets may need something like that. Berube fascinates me because I always used to look at Berube, and I remember when we covered that cup run that they went on, I had one of those conversations with him where he had benched Ryan O'Reilly, who ended up winning the playoff MVP, the Conn Smythe, that season, and he'd not benched him, dropped him down to the fourth line, and gave me the conversation. I couldn't believe he did it because I was covering the Jets, who would never put Mark Scheifele or Blake Wheeler on the fourth line at that time. And it kind of blew me away. And you've heard me talk about it on this podcast. His response was essentially, well, listen, if I keep him where he is and he's playing poorly, it hurts me. So I either move him down to the fourth line and he starts playing better and works his way up, which means I win, or B, doesn't harm me as much on the fourth line and I win. And it was just so direct and so strong. It kind of blew me away. And I always wondered, well, why don't the Jets do that? I think we've learned over the years why the Jets didn't do that. Ryan O'Reilly did that and handled it because Ryan O'Reilly is one of the greatest leaders in the game. You got to wonder if the Jets have that makeup, that Craig Berube could come in and challenge like let's say Craig Berube came in and at certain points of this year, he took a look at Kyle Connor and he said, hey, Kyle, not only am I breaking you and Mark Scheifele up, you're actually going to go down to the fourth line. Like, how would that be received? How would it be received if Connor Hellebuck had a coach that instead of saying, oh, he's the best goalie in the world and there's nothing wrong with him, everything else was the problem? Well, how would Connor Hellebuck respond if a Craig Berube came in and said, listen, he's the best goalie in the world, and we need him to play like it. And he's got a place that he can go in his game. You haven't heard a lot of those things around Winnipeg. I know Rick Bowness did a lot of it. You want to talk about blunt. Craig Berube is about as blunt as it gets. So I wonder the idea of what he can bring to a team the Jets desperately need. You wonder if the Jets have the psychological makeup to handle that kind of tough love. And I don't even know that I call it tough love. Craig Berube is a guy who's got expectations. You're a professional hockey player. You conduct yourself like this, and that's it. I don't need to give you love to get that. This is how it goes. It's your job. Do your job kind of thing, right? A little bit more of the Bill Belichick style. I don't know how the Jets would handle that. I think Dean Evison kind of comes down that road as well. I take a look at him, and he, wasn't afraid to challenge his players. When I covered him, Ken, on Hockey Night in Canada, he wasn't afraid to say when good players were playing poorly. Didn't have a problem calling them out, was very, very direct. Again, the Jets bristled with Rick Bowness in those moments. So Gallant, of all the people that you were talking about, Gallant is the one I think that fascinates me most. I think I made my reasons clear. But Gallant is a guy who seems to be able to keep people very, very accountable at all times, but do so in a very, very kind of soft style, which is maybe what I think the Winnipeg Jets would need more than anything. I'll say this, it's what I hear when I talk to Scott Arniel, Ken. The way that he's handled the bench when it's been him has been exactly that. He's not the kind of guy who calls out his team the way that Rick Bowness did. Scott Arniel handles things very, very calmly, very coolly. I think the conversations that he has with his players are a lot more Gallant-esque than they would be Berube-esque. So I actually do think that Scott Arniel, to come kind of full circle on all of this, Scott Arniel really is a fit for the Winnipeg Jets for so many reasons, including his, long history with Mark Chipman. But I guess every time I think of a coach, that's kind of what I'm thinking about. When I think of Woodcroft coming in, I think that may be a little bit too direct. I guess if you're picking up the theme, I don't think the Jets handle direct criticism well. And I don't think they, maybe they're getting better at it. And who knows, maybe Rick Bowness opened a door to those kind of coaches that the team could go down. But I still feel like even towards the end, the Jets didn't handle that the best. Todd McClellan, I actually think is another one who really fits that mold. So overall, a guy like Gallant, a guy like Arniel, a guy like McClellan, the kind of softer speaking coaches who are known for keeping teams accountable, but doing so with a little bit more of a soft sell approach. Those, I think, are what the Winnipeg Jets will be looking for.
Yeah, and don't mistake, soft-spoken for lacking passion. I mean, Scott Arniel has a lot of passion. I've seen it up close a number of times. The Manitoba Moose made the Calder Cup final in 2009. And yeah, they ran into a juggernaut in the Hershey Bears and they had a couple injuries that hurt them. But, for people to just say, oh, well, Scott Arniel is only getting hired because he played for the Jets or whatever and worked for True North. I mean, it couldn't be further from the truth. And I've seen him handle the day-to-day. He can handle it. He's a good motivator. He's a very good tactician. He's a very good communicator. And this is a guy who is well respected around the NHL. So if he ends up being the head coach, it's not because of his ties to True North. I mean, do they help? Sure. But Scott is a guy who's been up for head coaching jobs around the NHL and has worked in a lot of different markets. And, he has the credentials to back it up.
Sorry, I'm going to add another coach to the list of what I'm talking about because we also talked about it in this show. But that, we know that the Jets had a lot of interest in Rick Tocchet when they were looking for a new coach, and he went to Vancouver. This is exactly what I'm talking about. I don't know if you've seen Rick talk it in his press conferences, but he very much is like the truth serum is always flowing. He's always talking about whether his players had a good game or a bad game, but he does it in this like really, really soft way that it doesn't seem confrontational. And like I said, the one thing that I think would kind of differ between Rick Bowness and Rick Bowness is Rick Bowness was very direct and I think very rigid in that you would hear him say it. He'd be constantly trying to bring people back, get into your system. We're not playing this enough. No game was perfect. So I think there's a rigidity to Rick Bowness and how he wanted his players to play that Tocchet doesn't quite have. Tocchet wants the Jets to play a style, but he seemed a little bit more okay with his team exiting the style and then trying to bring them back. Now, let's not get too hard on Rick Bowness here because we saw what happened when the Winnipeg Jets exited the style the first year. They left it and they just never, ever came back to it. Part of that, looseness you earn from your coach, right? Like the fact that the Vancouver Canucks probably 6 or 7 times this year started to drift away from their game and then came back to it shows a coach that, okay, I don't have to hit the panic button if these guys are going in the wrong direction. Rick Bowness, you heard him say that what he learned from coaching the Jets after year one was that they needed to stay on top of their players more. They probably provided a little bit more looseness to the Jets in year one, which they thought would have been normal. And then the Jets just completely fell apart down the stretch and never found their way back. So the Jets probably earned that rigidity from their coach in that. But I still do think the Jets came from a place with Paul Maurice where there was very, there was never players being called out in the media. There wasn't ever really being fingers pointed. Paul Maurice never came out and said this player had an off night. He just did not do that. That's where the Jets came from. So I think you have to find a team and manage that team in a way that you don't kind of crash them over the head with criticism because they're just not the team I think that can handle that. Anyways, Ian Greengross is going to join us right now from his car. Ian, I'm going to introduce you here to the Kenny and Renny podcast. We talked about it down at the GM meetings. This is my coworker, Ken Wiebe here. The great guy to know.
Welcome.
Audience is in here. We've got 1,300 people watching live right now. I don't want to dig too much. We kind of just talked about this on the phone as this was happening. So I don't want to dig too deep and I don't want to dive into areas you can't dive into. So I'm going to kind of let you lead the conversation here. You're great because we just had Jay Bukala on here before and he was talking about how coaches now have representation. You're a guy who represents NHL coaches. But I don't know how much you want to talk about your clients or what you want to talk about, but if you could just kind of give me an idea, from the coach's perspective, what they're looking for and what's happening around the league as they jockey for open positions like the one in Winnipeg right now.
Sure. So, yeah, I represent coaches when I'm not out doing my honeydew list and get caught at Home Depot when you ask me to come on the show. So, by the way, nice hat. One of my clients is the D-line coach on the Cowboys, actually.
There you go. I knew it. I wanted you to feel welcome.
All right. So generally speaking, first of all, I can talk about my client list. It's not a state secret or anything. Donnie Granado, Jay Leach, Jeff Halpern, Dave Alexander's the goalie coach for the Blues. Derek King's an assistant coach in Chicago. So, a bunch of different guys around the league. And in terms of what, you asked me that I said I was qualified to talk about is what's happening around the league. And you see a couple things. So first of all, what you see is either you're hiring a guy who's had an NHL bench or has had a lot of experience running a bench, say in the AHL, barring some unusual circumstances like Edmonton, right? And you can give a guy a first-time head coaching job because if you look, you guys see guys like Bednar and Cooper and some of the actually longest tenured guys. I mean, although the turnover has been crazy, so longest tenured now is like 2 years, but nonetheless, some of the longest tenured guys were actually guys who was their first NHL coaching job. So, but the trend has been, either you recycle someone, and there's no offense to those guys. I'm not saying that Travis Green isn't deserving. Trent Green, an old NFL quarterback. There's where my mind is, right? Travis Green isn't deserving, or any of those other guys, or, if Berube or so on takes a job. But, teams also shouldn't be afraid to give that first-time head coach a job. But if you're going to be that, then you better have 3 or 4 years of running a bench somewhere. Otherwise, teams are not looking at anybody who doesn't.
Right. So that would make Jay Leach a great candidate for a lot of those jobs, Ian, right? I mean, again, I don't want to get into the specifics, but I mean, from your perspective, I mean, there's an opening on the bench that he was part of, but how delicate is it between, waiting for what Seattle's going to do versus getting his name out there to some of the other vacancies?
Every team is different. So some teams are like, look, like Travis, right? Go ahead and interview other teams. We don't know what we're doing yet. And if you happen to get an offer from one of those teams, we'll see where we're at. And if we're not somewhere, then, with our blessing, go there. Other teams, want you to wait a little bit. So there is that fine line, and I don't mean to give a general answer, but it's very team dependent. Because again, if you're in that mix, some of them don't want you somewhere else in case you are in that mix.
Ian, I find this fascinating because the last time the Jets went looking for a coach, they interviewed a whole bunch of them. And there was this great story that Kevin Cheveldayoff had about going to John Tortorella's place, stayed there for 6 hours, had breakfast and lunch there. And Torts was really blunt, was like, what's going on that I'm hearing about your team in the media? I'm down here in Philadelphia and I'm hearing about your team. What, you got to get that under control. But one of the things that Kevin Cheveldayoff made clear, and I think, most general managers make clear, is it's an opportunity when you're replacing a head coach, because you get to go talk to all the brightest minds in the game who come in and tell you, well, this is where I think you guys are weak. This is what I think's wrong with your team. This is how I think you can help it. As a guy who represents coaches, how do you send them into a meeting so that they are able to share enough information to maybe try and convince them I'm the guy to take over that job, and not be the guy who's just constantly giving away state secrets for free?
The problem is if you don't give your whole heart in an interview, you're never getting the job in the first place. And so, you need to make that connection. And, what I tell my clients is you need to prepare for all scenarios, right? So some GMs may want to talk about chocolate, some may want to talk about strawberry, and some may want to talk about vanilla. And so we need to prepare you. And if you're strong on X's and O's, and let's say that's the chocolate version, but the guy wants to get to know you over a beer and that's the strawberry version, you better be ready for both. And yeah, sometimes you are going to be in 3 or 4 different interviews over the years and give away what you're doing. But I mean, if you don't do that and you don't mesh with the guy who's hiring you, you're never going to get hired in the first place.
Sometimes you just got to have the Neapolitan ice cream, I guess, right?
Right.
Put them all together. Ian, I mean, I was curious. I mentioned earlier, I mean, when Spencer Carberry has success, as a first-time NHL head coach, but he's run his own bench and he's been an assistant in Toronto. I mean, does that help some of those first-time, guys that are trying to break through and have great reputations at that American Hockey League level? Can that help? Because we know that sometimes it's cyclical. Sometimes it's the recycled version. Sometimes it's only a winner. Sometimes, maybe there's a hot shot the junior ranks or college. But when guys come up from the American Hockey League, how big a benefit is to those people in this situation?
It's very beneficial, right? I mean, you need to have been through it before, and I have a couple clients who have only assistant experience at both levels, and one who's won a couple Stanley Cups. And when he's interviewed, again, it comes back to, unfortunately, sometimes he hasn't had a chance to run a bench, and so you need that experience. I don't necessarily think he individually, just because of his unique circumstances of playing long in the playoffs and betting on a winning coaching staff, but for the most part, yeah, if you don't have that, then, so to answer your other part of the question with Spencer and guys like that, of course, I mean, you look at what Greg Cronin even did in Anaheim. They weren't supposed to win. They started off hot, sure, he's new, everything's working. Then it wasn't, and they kind of came back a little bit towards the end. Yes, every time a new head coach, but again, Bednar, first-time head coach, Cooper, first-time head coach at the NHL level. So we've taken a look at some of those numbers, me and my clients. And so we've seen that, yes, you can do it. But again, if you don't have some level of head coaching, you're going to almost be skipped over.
I had a coach one time, an NHL coach, tell me, and I would describe them as maybe a little bit old school, but tell me that coaches don't change and that he prepares for other teams by preparing for that coach. And that coach can leave this team and go to a team on the opposite side of the country with a different kind of style. And yet he still prepares for that coach because he was so believing that coaches just are basically who they are. They coach their style. How much, I guess, from your experience is a coach just a natural fit for a team, or how much do your clients maybe adapt to the teams that they are trying to go to?
It's a little bit of both. And I mean, again, not to kind of middle the answer, but so like everyone who's going to interview has their own system, right? I mean, they like, this is the style I like to play. This is what I've been successful with and coaching at. And they wouldn't be in the room if they weren't successful running whatever system they're going to pitch. So they're certainly going to say, I do this. But, as one of my other coaches said, if you get there and you have a bunch of chocolate players and you try and run a strawberry system, you're not going to win a lot of games. So, you have to be somewhat flexible and you have to let your players grow into your system as well. Right. I mean, so to take the example here in Chicago, and it's no offense to Jeremy, Quenneville ran a man-to-man. Everyone knew what their responsibility was. You switch to Jeremy, who took over here in Chicago, Jeremy Colleton, who's a good coach, had a lot of success in the AHL and overseas, but, he ran his own. And by the time guys learned to switch, it was too late for him and he was out the door, right? So, it's not so much that you need to stick to your system because, again, that, the Jeremy example shows what happens. If he'd have started from ground zero with a bunch of guys who hadn't been there for 10 years, remember, he's taking over Brent Seabrook and Duncan Keith and Patrick Kane and, guys who ran the same system for 10 years. You can't switch 10 years even in 2 years. It just doesn't happen. So if you're a new coach coming into that kind of situation, you're probably going to have to adapt yourself to them. Now, if you're taking over more in a, Spencer Carberry, they were kind of middle, right? They didn't really truly rebuild and they didn't truly say we're all in on the playoffs either, but more like a Greg Cronin situation where you're taking it on a rebuild. Yeah, you can mold the players to your system because more likely some of them have only been there a couple of years and you're going to have an influx of young talent who you can say, all right, these are the guys who would fit my system. Let's bring them in. Let's bring them along. So you can be a little more rigid, funny enough. So, if you're coming into more of a situation where they're on the verge of the playoffs, and they've been running a certain system, you might have a tougher time switching gears, as what happened to Jeremy here in Chicago, who I don't represent. I just happen to be in Chicago. So I saw that one a lot close up.
Yeah, right on. And just kind of last one for me, we know that sometimes if you have a connection to someone making the calls, it may be easier if there's a history there. I mean, How do you get a new candidate onto the radar of a team that's looking that maybe didn't consider that candidate before they got in touch with you?
I mean, so I myself went, and this is where Sean and I met face to face. I go to the GM meetings, which are about 5 weeks before the end of the season. And, I try and get FaceTime with teams that I know are going to be looking at the end of the season, right? By that point, you pretty much know who's getting chopped in 4 or 5 weeks. Obviously, some surprises stay, some surprises for teams that I didn't consider. But, you make sure you have those relationships. And if I call, just because he's here in Chicago, not that they're switching. And in fact, I have Derek King here and I just had lunch with him. Funny enough today, they're not switching staffs. But if I call Kyle Davidson, I already have a relationship with Kyle. And I'm not going to call Kyle and say, I've got this. And if I give him 16 names, I might as well give him 0 names. But if I know, okay, look, he wants someone who's had an NHL bench before, I'll mention those level of clients. If he's looking more for we're young and up and coming and we need someone who's going to grow with the team, I'll mention that 3 or 4 subset of my clients. So that's how you earn the respect of a GM when you're texting them about your clients or you're calling them. If you just throw a text that has all 16 names, you might as well have sent no names. But if you really send out the 2, 3, 4 that are going to fit the criteria that they're looking for, which they'll tell you, they'll tell you that, hey, we need someone who's got a bench. We're kind of that playoff level, say New Jersey, right? I believe New Jersey is looking for someone who's probably had more experience than not. That's not to say that they won't, but more often than not, I find a team at that, who's expected to be at that level will want someone with experience. So I'm not going to send them some guy who's coached 2 years of the AHL, right? That just doesn't make sense.
Before we let you go, your job is all about serving your clients. You've got such a cool story though. So I want you to quickly talk about your near almost winning the championship, the NCAA championship with some players that Winnipeg Jets fans would know a lot about, and just quickly touch on your Black Ace time with the Chicago Blackhawks.
All right. So the short version, so we're not here for like another hour and a half of the podcast, is I was like the 15th string goalie, backup goalie at Boston University when I was there. I played in a bunch of JV games because for a couple of years they did actually have a JV. They used it for two purposes. One, to develop all the extras who weren't currently skating with the varsity to, let them have some game and experience and extra practice time, but also to scout out like any U18s who might commit to BU. So we actually, and then as a goalie, as you know, there's always a shortage. So I went to a lot of varsity practices as well. So yeah, so you mentioned the names Winnipeg may be familiar with. Keith Tkachuk was one of the guys at varsity practice that, I know Chucky. In fact, I saw him when BU played at Notre Dame as he's scouting for St. Louis. So I saw him at the game because, the BU, I went to the game and so on. Yeah, Tony Amante was there. Mike Sullivan was there. Joe Sacco was there. Yeah, so we lost the national championship game in triple overtime my junior year. And then how I again, part of the longer story, I was a hockey agent. The guy I worked for in the business bought part of the Wolves, the minor league team here in Chicago, got out of the business. I'm a lot better at math than I am at hockey, fortunately. So I got a job working for a football agent, helping with the salary cap, and my hockey agenting career kind of went away, and I was mostly full-time football. And the way I got back into hockey was, again, always a shortage of goalies. So in the summer of 2014, the Hawks guys were skating, and Corey Crawford likes to stay in Montreal all summer, and Antti Ranta was in Finland all summer. And so the only goalie they had around was Scott Darling. And so I knew some of the guys around, and they asked me to basically skate with them. And that led to me being the goalie all summer, right up to the captain skates until about a day before practice, which led to me that year when they won the cup. So that was the 14-15 season when they won the cup in 2015 at the end of that summer season, or that season into the summer into the season. They didn't want Antti to do the Black Ace practice, right? Because at that point, Scott had been playing more than Antti. So Antti was quote unquote the third goalie. And Antti's obviously a great goalie still in the NHL. So I went to Black Ace practice every day during the conference finals and the Stanley Cup.
Very cool.
And
that's the short version, by the way.
Yeah, well, I got to hear the long version. The long version is a lot of bragging about, flashing the leather on guys like Ace and those boys. It was great. So, hey, Ian, the hockey world puts you in touch with a lot of really, really fascinating, interesting people. You were maybe the top of the list of new people that I met this year for that. So, I really enjoyed out with you down there. Really enjoyed our time and all the information, all the stories and stuff like that. I was glad to get you on the podcast here. I'm happy you said yes. You're welcome to come chat with us on Kenny and Renny anytime.
Whenever you need me.
We're thinking that, just because you know so much about Chicago with the Bedard years starting to blossom, they're going to be an important team soon enough as well. So hopefully this is the beginning of a long relationship. It was great to have you.
Absolutely. Thanks, guys.
Thank you, Ian. Appreciate it, man.
Thank you.
Now I got to go finish the honeydew list.
Enjoy the summer, man. Thank you.
See ya. Ken, before we shut this down, I got to give a shout out to the rest of our folks. Just wanted to, I don't know, we aren't handing out any awards, but TCB party, like I said, 34 spots remain open. Get a hold of me, direct message me at SN Sean Reynolds to snag up some of those spots. There aren't a lot left. Like I said, 34 out of 250, and we've only been, selling them for about 6 days, and it's not like we have anywhere to advertise them. So we expect those to go. If you want to be some of the people who take them, make sure you jump on top and get them. Direct message me. And of course, you can get some frosty, delicious lamplighters there. The blueberry, which is my favorite, all the greats, and the pizza buffet is going to be a part of that as well. $20 gets you your first drink, and it gets you the pizza and appy buffet, and it also gets you talking to Kenny, Renny, and basically everyone in the sports media landscape in Winnipeg.
We'll have you covered.
Yeah, shout out to the Keg as well. What a great sponsorship group they were for us this year. Got all the $50 gift certificates handed out for the Keg save of the game. Hopefully, we saved you some time searching around for different analysis on all of this kind of stuff, because they sure saved the Kenny and Renny community a lot this year. Of course. And the Johnston Group, we got to give a shout out to the Kenny and Renny OGs. Do you run a small business in Canada? Look to Canada's #1 employee benefits plan, Chambers Plan, to give you a competitive edge. Chambers Plan is the simple, stable, smart choice for over 30,000 businesses countrywide. Visit chamberplan.ca to learn more. And the Pristine Roofing wake-up call. Let's hand that out to all the people who were going nuts on Rick Bowness all year. Why were you going so crazy on Rick Bowness in a Jack Adams year, and the year that he represents the Central Division at the All-Star game? Not longest tenured, more games behind an NHL bench than any coach in NHL history. It's going to be what a career lived, what a life lived. Glad that we got to cover part of it. And just for the Johnston Group, do you run a small business in Canada? Look to Canada's #1 employee benefits plan, Chambers Plan, to give you a competitive edge. Chambers Plan is the simple, stable, smart choice for over 30,000 businesses countrywide. Visit chamberplan.ca to learn more. I also need to shout out the Pristine Roofing Company and their wake up call. You know what to do. Get a hold of our main guy, North End Rick, 981-6289. You can also call Pristine Roofing as well at 1-204-237-7663. Don't forget their Pay It Forward program still open. If you need, or if you know someone who needs a new roof, can't afford it, get a hold of Pristine Roofing. Tell them their situation. They may get that brand new roof, courtesy of the generosity of Pristine Roofing. I wanted to bring this up here, Ken. There's someone in the chat room who's really
Pelly Lindbergh needed the wake-up call, I think.
Pelly Lindbergh really hurt people. And Pelly Lindbergh has spent this entire show seemingly trying to hurt the two of us. Zero sources for Kenny or Renny, or they would have broken something Jets related at some point in the last 10 years. Zip, zilch, nada. Hey, Pelly, you got me there. But even though there are some things that I've broken before, that's not my job. I don't see it as being my job, bud. I'm a host. That's a very specific thing. I'm supposed to tell stories to the audience, elicit stories from players. I'm very proud of the job that I do. You can go back and take out my track record if you want to go listen to any of the Colorado Avalanche or Winnipeg Jets avails during the playoffs. You'll hear me asking questions, and you'll quite often, like in the case of the Colorado Avalanche, a whole bunch of the hype video that they did were based off of answers to questions that I asked in there. I'm very proud of the work that I do, Pelly, as much as you want to tear it down. I'm not an insider. That's not my job. That's not what I'm paid for. That's not what I go out to try to do. You're right. I'm not out there breaking stuff. I didn't break Rick Bowness leaving. If that means you need to turn me off, go for it, bud. I don't. I will say this: if you want to reach out and have any conversations or anything like that, and maybe want to do it in a manner where you don't seem so angry, we can do that at any time, my guy. You don't need to bring so much heat, buddy. Like T. Will says here, Rennie's more of an outsider. That's where I belong, on the outside of things, asking questions, trying to bring the information out to the rest of you. I'm standing outside with the rest of you, and I'm trying to bring the good stuff out of the house and in front of all of you for you to see it. Ken, anything you want to say before we go?
Well, happy to have broken the Kevin Cheveldayoff extension news a couple of years ago. Sorry, Pelly, for not having that. For you forgetting.
Okay,
sorry
that's
about
good.
that.
That's good. I didn't take it that way, but nothing but love. Good stuff. Yeah.
And what sorry, I asked Jay Bukala what series this round intrigues you the most. I mean, for me, it's Dallas, Colorado, I think. With all due respect for the folks in the Pacific Division, which again, I think it's going to be a great series, but can't wait for the Avalanche and Stars to get at it here. We've talked about this a lot. I mean, Colorado is playing at a ridiculous level, very reminiscent of 2022 without Gabe Landeskog being in the lineup. And yes, the rosters are different, but they're starting to look like that team. But also on the flip side for me, Sean, the fact that the Dallas Stars were able to outlast the Vegas Golden Knights. I mean, in a first round matchup that looked like a conference final, to me, that makes them very dangerous, especially with Jake Ottinger battling back after a very tough game one. To me, they look like they're going to be tough to beat. Obviously, that going 7 games in the first round was tough for them. But I think that they're going to put up an incredible fight here. I think that's going to be the best series out of the 4, even though, yeah, I mean, Boston, Florida is interesting. So is New York and Carolina. But for me, it's the Central Division battle that I'll have my closest eyes on.
That one I find fascinating, and I'm wondering, was it 2006? 2006, the year Carolina wins it. I get a draft totally blown up by the Edmonton Oilers, who go on that run and knock off. I'd gone heavy on Ducks and Sharks players, and I'd gone heavy on Buffalo Sabres players, and 2 of those teams make it to the conference finals. The Jets knock off both the Ducks and the Sharks, and the Carolina Hurricanes, I think in 7, beat the Buffalo Sabres. And I was leading the draft right until the very last game, and I just kept saying to the Oilers, like thinking of the Oilers, listen, if you're not going to win it, lose it in 4, so I win my draft, because I had no one left on the Oilers, and I didn't have anyone on Carolina. And Carolina got closer and closer and closer, went to game 7, and they tied. The person who ended up winning the draft tied with me, and then won the draft on an empty net goal in that game, which drove me absolutely crazy. I don't have money to lose in this situation, but you always have credibility to lose. I know a lot of people are looking, and Jay said it himself, like the Colorado Avalanche. And I know Biz was a guy who talked quite a bit about the Colorado Avalanche and thought that they were going to be absolutely phenomenal. I know a lot of people saw what they did to the Winnipeg Jets and think that that means they're going to go a long way. I still think Dallas is going to win that series. And maybe I'm
picking them too. We're both in agreement here. I think, we won't be surprised if Colorado wins, but Dallas has a pretty secure system, and they've done it at a high level. Dallas, to me, feels like Colorado in 2022. They've been knocking on the door. This feels like their best chance to bust through.
Well, and the way that they handled going down 2-0 in that series against Vegas, and the way that they were able to clamp that series down, both those teams, like that to me was the Spider-Man meme, that series. That was 2 teams looking in a mirror, pointing at each other. Regardless, Dallas, that one intrigues me, because I think the Colorado Avalanche have the if I'm wrong about them, they may be that team that just absolutely steamrolls to the cup final and wins it all. And I'm the guy who is saying that they were a house of cards before the start of the playoffs. They've already embarrassed me with what they did to the Winnipeg Jets. Maybe they'll do it even more, but you got to double down. So I'm taking Dallas. I'm taking Edmonton. I'm taking Florida, even after what happened in that game. And I'm taking the New York Rangers. Anyways, folks, that's it for us. Probably last time we talked to you before the year ender. Get out, get your tickets, folks. Direct message me. Oh, and someone else had said this as well. I'll throw this on there. Who was it? Frank says, I can't ask for tickets for the year ender because I don't have X. Everyone out there is getting their emails from my personal email account anyways. So it is SEANCHUCKY@gmail.com. Reach out to me, SeanChucky@gmail.com, if you want tickets. That's another way to do it. Other than that, we will see everybody at that event. It's going to be a blast. We can't wait to catch up with all of you. One of our favorite things to do is to meet up with everyone face to face. So we will do that on Monday, the 13th, starting at 6. If you've paid for your tickets, you already have your tickets, and you know that already. Talk to you later, folks. We'll see you on Monday.